Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar on climate action in the Vermont Legislature in 2020. My name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm an organizer with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, and I'll be facilitating the tech of tonight's webinar. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes to join us. I want to make sure that everyone on the webinar knows that they can ask questions at any time by typing them into the chat or questions feature on the right hand of the screen. Please ask them as they come up, and we will have time at the end of the presentation for folks to get those answered. Please note that we have a lot of folks who have signed up for tonight's webinar, I think indicative of some fantastic interest in serious climate action in Vermont. And so it may not be possible for us to answer every question, but we will do what we can to get to as many of them as possible. Please give us just another couple of minutes and we'll get started.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for waiting a few moments, and thank you more so for joining us this evening. I'm Johanna Miller. I'm the Energy and Climate Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I am here with my colleagues, Ben Edgerly Walsh of VPIRG and Lauren Hierl from the Vermont Conservation Voters. We are so glad to be sharing this evening here with you tonight. We have a lot of folks who have signed up to participate in this webinar, as Ian noted, I think showing the interest in these pressing issues. And we're grateful for your time. We're also spending time with you here this evening away from our 5 adorable children who you see here on the screen, and they are some of the most fundamental reasons why we are focused on these pressing issues with you all right now. So yeah, we have a wide range of people, almost 300 people registered for this webinar, clearly significant interest. Some of you may have seen a little bit about what we will be sharing before. Some of you might be tuning in for the first time. Apologies if some of what we share is redundant for some, but we're gonna have time to go into deeper detail. But we're joined on this webinar by legislators and youth leaders and local energy committee members, utility leaders, lobbyists for the fossil fuel sector, and lobbyists for some of the bills that we're going to be talking about tonight as well. So it's a wide range of interest. And again, we really appreciate you making the time this evening. So before we dig in a little bit further, I just want to give you a sense of, we're going to start at a high level, frame out what we're talking about and the why. And then we're also going to go into a shared climate policy platform and also share with you some very recent polling that VPIRG and Vermont Conservation Voters just commissioned related to public interest in climate action and the policies that we're going to be talking about specifically. So first, though, before we dig in, I just wanted to share with you the principles that inform the policy priorities that we're going to be talking about tonight, which are those principles highlighted here: the environment, the economy, and equity. We are talking about climate action because it's wreaking havoc on our environment and costing us tremendously in quality of life and far more. Failing to take action is also a huge economic opportunity, squandered economic opportunity, and it is also a tremendous equity issue. So these are the 3 fundamental principles that really guide our policies and our work. And our work is really important. Just wanted to share with you here a few of the recent headlines that you may or may not have seen, sort of really highlighting what we're talking about when it comes to the climate crisis. You know, we have some economists talking about the significant public health issue climate change is, the high cost to our economy from climate exacerbated events, the short window of time that we have to act. The United Nations report after report is saying rapid transformational action is essential to stave off global climate disaster. And in the hopeful sphere, because that's what we're talking about here and what we're looking forward to working with you all on, is that taking action on climate is a huge job creation opportunity, potentially the greatest economic opportunity we have ever seen. So continuing to squander time doing far too little too late is not only costly in terms of our planet, but also a huge economic opportunity left on the table. So, and this is just couldn't help but say it, but what we're talking about here is our friends down south, what is happening in Australia in terms of their country is on fire, and the wildfires there that are burning across that nation are wreaking havoc in a way that we can only imagine, and we really, really need to and must hope to avoid here. So thinking about them and focusing on what we can do here in our lives and in this webinar, in this state, to do our part on climate, because considering the high costs, the grave consequences, again, the squandered economic opportunity of resting on our laurels, the question is, are we doing our part? Many of you have probably seen this chart before. The answer to that, as you know, unfortunately, is no. In fact, our carbon pollution, despite our very strong greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that we've had on the books since 2006, our carbon pollution has gone up 16% over our 1990 level. So we are nowhere near meeting our tripartisan supported commitments. And that makes us sort of unique regionally when we look to many of our neighbors, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. Instead of doing our part, our greenhouse gas emissions are going up. Our neighbors' greenhouse gas emissions are going down. So what that means for us and what we're talking about tonight is doing our part. And we're going to lay out a platform of shared coalition priorities that we think are a really strong fundamental step forward that will change the trajectory of those rising greenhouse gas emissions and set us on a path to doing our part and to recouping more of the dollars that we currently export out of state. As you probably have heard, we spend about $1.5 to $2 billion every year importing dirty fossil fuels. And that means about 80% of those dollars that we spend on that energy leave our economy. This is an image from my friends at the Energy Action Network, who have done a tremendous amount of research and analysis, just showing how much money leaves our economy when we pay for the fossil fuels that we currently use, many of us, to heat our homes, get where we need to go, that sort of thing. So keeping more of those energy dollars in our state is a huge economic and job creation opportunity. We have put a lot of people to work in the clean energy sector, largely in weatherization and solar jobs. We need to maintain our commitment to those kinds of jobs and ramp it up while simultaneously doing our part on climate. So we have a huge economic opportunity. This is a tremendous equity issue. Ben is going to walk us through the four priorities of a shared coalition platform agenda. So he'll spend some time digging into the substance. We'll get into the polling. We want to wrap up with some thoughts on what you can do to help us move this agenda, knowing this, again, that this agenda is an important foot forward, but there will still be more work to do. So Ben, take it away.
Thanks so much, Joey. As Joey mentioned earlier, This is something that might be review for some of you. I think it would be sort of hard to hear the details of these bills enough, because certainly there are a lot of them. And then obviously for some of you, this is probably the first time that you're hearing about a lot of this. The first thing that I want to say before I get into the priorities on this page here, and then into a little bit more detail in a moment, is just to drive home those 3 points of, the 3 sort of principles that we're operating off of when we're working on these 4 bills or any pieces of climate legislation, looking at the environment, the effect on the economy, and whether or not these policies or any other climate policies are equitable and just. And those really are principles that we think truly can be embodied in each of these pieces of legislation. And that's a lot of our work in the building and a lot of the work that we're going to be asking all of you to do and again, we're going to be getting into this more later, be in touch with your legislators, be in touch with the governor, because we need these pieces of legislation to pass and ultimately be signed by the governor, and we need them to be good for her environment, economy, and all Vermonters. And so we'll be talking more about how each of those each of these bills can really hit those 3 marks as well as possible. So the first thing that we're going to be advocating for, and again, I'm going to be getting into more detail on all of these in a moment, is significantly more accountability within our climate targets. As Joey mentioned a moment ago, we have not been hitting them. That is not acceptable. We cannot allow that any longer. Number 2, getting to 100% renewable electricity by 2030, building on some of the great work we've already done in the electric sector in Vermont, expanding our work on electrification and efficiency, and then looking at a program that's a regional program around sort of a cap and invest model called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which seeks to really drive down our emissions, in particular in the transportation sector. So the first thing that I mentioned there was this idea of accountability, and that is, excuse me, really embodied in a piece of legislation that's being called the Global Warming Solutions Act. This is a pretty simple idea. Essentially, it says we have goals in statute right now. The legislature voted on them in 2006. They were in line with the science then. Our governor, then a state senator, voted for them back at that time, but they were aspirational. They had no force of law, and we have not done the work collectively as a state to actually ensure that we would hit those targets, and so we haven't. What you see on the screen here is in the green line at the top, Vermont's emissions, which, as we've discussed, have been going up. Massachusetts emissions in blue, since they passed their Global Warming Solutions Act back in the late 2000s, have been actually trending downward in line with their targets. And the green dotted line at the bottom there, that's where we should have headed had we actually acted to get to the targets that we passed back in 2006. So this bill would, at its simplest, say these are no longer aspirational goals, these are requirements, and it would give state government both the authority and responsibility to actually get to those targets. Obviously, it's not a 1-paragraph bill. There are going to be a lot more details that we'll be seeing coming out in the coming days, but that's at its core what this bill is all about. This is legislation that, as we mentioned, has been passed in Massachusetts. Connecticut has a similar law on the books, and just this past summer, New York and Maine also both passed laws that were very similar, though they had different titles. The idea here is that we're really unleashing, all of state government towards climate action in a way that we just have failed to do so far. What we are pushing for in this bill, and again, the actual legislation will be introduced in a few days to a week or two, but what we're going to be pushing for is a set of targets that would require Vermont to hit our equivalent for the 2025 Paris Climate Accord goals that the United States committed to under President Obama. So that would be the near-term goal. And then by 2030, getting us on track to hit our comprehensive energy plan target of 40% reduction in climate pollution, and then ultimately at least 80% reductions by 2050 with a target of net zero climate pollution. So hitting at least that 80% in absolute reductions, and then the remaining 20% perhaps coming from sequestration from our farms and forests. And really putting our entire economy to work, reducing our climate pollution. Again, as you're going to hear throughout, making sure that this bill really embodies the principles of a just transition for all Vermonters and all Vermont communities is essential. And we also think there's a real opportunity to advance the idea of resilience. We know that climate change is something that we need to work to reduce the impact of by reducing our climate pollution. We also know that some of the impacts are here already and more on the way no matter what we do as a state. And so we need to build more resilient homes, businesses, communities, and a state, and that this law has an opportunity to really advance that idea as well. The last thing I'll mention here is, again, just to reiterate, Massachusetts has this on the books. It's been a very successful model. And then we also have Maine and New York implementing these laws already. They were passed over the summer. The councils and commissions that they created have started to act, started to meet. And we can actually look to these models and start to look at what's been successful, what might we want to emulate, what might we want to steer away from as we're advocating for this legislation in the coming weeks and months. Number two, passing 100% renewable electricity standard that gets us to 100% renewable electricity across all of Vermont's electric utilities by 2030. That would put Vermont at the forefront on renewable electricity nationally. A number of states have passed these very similar laws, many of them with somewhat later target dates. Washington, D.C., notably similar to Vermont in population, though obviously very different in many other ways, actually has currently the earliest target date for 100% renewable, and that's 2032. So we'd be essentially joining them in recognizing that this pace is really essential from a climate standpoint. From our perspective, it's essential that this kind of legislation really focus on getting new renewable electricity built, and in particular built here in Vermont. So we're going to be calling for at least the doubling, and ideally significantly more than that, of the renewables that are going to be required to be built right here in the Green Mountain State. And we think that that can be done in a way that, again, really builds the resilience of our electric infrastructure by incorporating elements of energy storage along with that local distributed renewable generation, and builds the resilience of our communities for the next Irene or the next Halloween storm, so that our lights can be on when they might otherwise not be. Number three, we today, one of our most successful climate programs is the work of Efficiency Vermont and Vermont's other energy efficiency utility in the electric space, Burlington Electric Department. They have done some incredible work to reduce the usage of electricity over the years. The numbers, when you look at them as far as how much electricity we've avoided because of their work, are just staggering. We'd be using something like 15% more electricity today without their work. And that over the life of those programs would be enough to power the state several times for an entire year, several times over. So they've done some incredible work in the electric space, but there is an incredible untapped potential to unleash their expertise on the broader problem of climate pollution. They can do some work to reduce climate pollution, obviously in the electric sector, but right now their hands are largely tied and they can't go after transportation pollution. They can't help Vermonters largely can help Vermonters transition to cleaner heating sources. And they are significantly limited in what they can do in things like weatherization and efficiency outside of the electric space. And so really this idea is taking this incredibly effective, successful model we have in the energy efficiency utilities and Efficiency Vermont in particular, and unleashing it on climate pollution more broadly. And if we do that, we are confident that the climate pollution that they are cutting could be multiplied several times beyond sort of the business as usual and only allowing them to work in the electric space. Finally, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a regional collaboration across the Northeast, though not exclusively New England states. As you can see, it actually extends much farther south than that. That would put a cap on the total pollution allowed in the transportation sector from diesel and gasoline, and would lower that limit over time. That program would raise funds, which would then be granted to the states, and each state, obviously meaning Vermont in this case, would have full authority to spend that money on climate pollution reductions as they saw fit. So our expectation is that there will be legislation on this this year, excuse me, and our intent is to advocate for a program that is focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing climate pollution in the transportation sector, and doing that in a way that is equitable and just and really prioritizes low-income and rural Vermonters who today have a much higher transportation energy burden. They spend a larger percentage of their income on transportation than other Vermonters. And we actually have an incredible opportunity right now to help fix that problem and make our transportation sector not just more clean, but also more affordable. And so that's definitely going to be our focus as we're looking at the Transportation and Climate Initiative going forward. So before I turn it over to Lauren to talk a little bit about the polling that VPIRG and VCV did in December of last year, which is to say just a few weeks ago now, last decade. Again, for each of these pieces of legislation, and really all climate legislation that any of our organizations are working for, we're looking for legislation that dramatically cuts our climate pollution, that grows our economy, and it does both of those things in a way that is equitable and just from an income standpoint and from a geographic standpoint, that really raises all boats and allows all Vermonters and Vermont communities to participate in this transition to a cleaner economy. And we believe that each of these pieces of legislation can advance all three of those goals, and that will be our litmus test as we're going forward and what we will be advocating for in the State House, and what we're so glad that all of you will be able to help us advocate for in the coming weeks and months.
Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Hierl from Vermont Conservation Voters, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes just walking you through this recent polling that we did. And this was polling that was commissioned by Vermont Conservation Voters and VPIRG, really wanting to look at where do Vermonters stand on these policies that we knew were going to be coming up in front of the legislature. These are policies that a number of advocates and a wide coalition has been working on. Also wanted to acknowledge that the Climate Solutions Caucus and a number of lawmakers have been working incredibly hard, literally since the day that the last session ended, developing this policy platform and a lot of these ideas. So seeing what was coming up, wanted to get a sense of where Vermonters stand. So we commissioned the polling firm Public Policy Polling, which is a well-recognized national polling firm, to do this for us. They conducted this December 3rd and 4th in 2019. So as Ben said just a few weeks ago, they reached 768 Vermont voters all over the state, which gave a low margin of error, plus or minus 3.5%. So just to give you a sense of how many people we were talking to in this poll. So our first basic question was, how worried are you about global warming? And it was really kind of surprising to us how strong the results were in terms of just how many Vermonters are very worried about global warming. So 61% of people, that's an incredibly high number, with 76% overall worried about global warming. And we were looking at this compared to polling that we had done just a few years ago, where the total amount of people worried about global warming was similar, but only 35% at that time had said that they were very worried. So we've seen this dramatic increase in people becoming more and more concerned, and this really broad kind of interest and watching this issue closely. And it's worth noting that this concern is high across the state. So, sometimes people, put forward that maybe this is just something that people in Chittenden County or other certain parts of the state care about, but it's really interesting to see how consistent concern is for climate in all parts of the state and all types of communities. So that's a really important and interesting result as well. We asked about support again for this policy platform that Ben was just walking us through. So we asked about the support for evolving the energy efficiency utilities to expand their mandate to be able to invest in things like weatherization, efficient electric heating and transportation options, and an overwhelming positive support for that, 84%. We asked about requiring the state to, giving the state government both the authority and responsibility to meet the Paris Climate Accord targets and our own 2050 climate pollution targets. Again, overwhelming support, more than 3/4 of Vermonters supporting that policy. Similarly, we asked about supporting Vermont getting 100% of our electricity from clean, renewable energy sources, including wind and solar by 2030, and incredibly strong 76% support for that as well. And we really wanted to make sure that we're not just having people talk about the concept of renewable energy, but do you support us building that right here in Vermont? And again, really strong results with 73% of Vermonters supporting us, significantly increasing the amount of in-state renewable energy like wind and solar. So really positive, encouraging results there. And Transportation and Climate Initiative, again, about 3/4 of Vermonters supporting us addressing climate pollution from the transportation sector by charging fossil fuel companies a fee to pollute. When you start talking about the kinds of investments we can make with that money, that's where people can get even more excited. So great to see this result on just, how do people feel about a cap and invest program for our transportation sector? So, all 4 of these big pieces of our policy platform, wide, broad support. Wanted to note, looking at, how different kinds of Vermonters are viewing these. We saw really strong support among Democrats, progressives, and independents. Republicans were a little more split, but still strong results across the board, and really notable how strong the support was among independents. Also, again, as I showed you with the concern about global warming, it was really interesting and encouraging to see how consistent the results are for the support for each of these policy priorities across the state. So you're seeing in all parts of the state this really widespread and consistent high support for expanding our efficiency programs, supporting the Global Warming Solutions Act to hold the state accountable to meeting our climate goals, and then for 100% clean energy and the Transportation and Climate Initiative. Again, we're seeing, 3/4 or so and higher of Vermonters supporting these policies. So really encouraging and exciting to see that, lawmakers from every part of the state have constituents overwhelmingly supporting this policy platform. So great to see that Vermonters are with us. Wanted to highlight this quote from FDR. Let's see, now half of it's covered, but
Sure.
So I agree with you. I want to do it. Now go out and make me do it. So we know that Vermonters are with us. We know we have a lot of legislative allies who want to do this, but we also know that there's going to be intense pressure from people who want to see none of this platform move. And doing nothing is always easier than doing something and taking these important and meaningful steps on climate. So that's why we're going to need all of you to stand with us and make your voices heard. And I'm going to turn it back over to Joey to give you some thoughts on how you can do that.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And thank you all. We're going to get to some of your questions, but just a moment. But I mean, like you just heard from Ben, we have a really strong platform of key policy priorities that we are looking forward to working with you all and policymakers to move this session. We will be rolling out that platform publicly shortly. This is a coalition of over 20 groups, including environmental organizations, but business, low income, faith, youth, social justice, public health organizations. So there's a lot of support for these policies, as you heard from Lauren in the polling, but we're going to need all of you supporting these policies early and often. We know our opponents will work incredibly hard. They are extremely well funded with lots of dollars behind them, as well as some significant inertia. So even if you're calling for more and recognizing that even the policy platform that we're putting forward is not enough, rightfully recognizing that we need to do far more, we're rolling up our sleeves and looking forward to moving this policy agenda with you all as a strong, essential foot forward. So a yes and approach is something we are looking forward to working on with you. And we're doing that, as we noted, in coalition. This is an example of the kind of coalition that we built last year on our 2019 policy platform. You'll see many of the kinds of groups I just mentioned. And we will be rolling out the 2021 shortly. And then on the right there, you'll see our Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus, which is now 84 members strong. Since days after the 2019 legislative session broke, members of the Climate Solutions Caucus got to work rolling up their sleeves, figuring out how to ensure that we take significant steps forward this upcoming legislative session. They were out across the state of Vermont earlier this fall. Many of you might have attended. They have put together a platform very similar to ours in terms of turning our goals into requirements, committing to 100% renewable energy, continuing our commitment in weatherization and efficiency, modernizing our efficiency utilities, and taking a strong foot forward on the Transportation and Climate Initiative is a really important foundational program. But all of this work is not going to be easy. So that's where you come in. We need you to be doing as much as you can in as many ways as possible. And some ideas that we just wanted to share with you is making sure that you are engaging with your legislators, meeting with them regularly, making phone calls, emailing them, letting them know that you hope that they will take action and that you support them in doing so. Making sure that the governor also hears that you support climate action. Oftentimes we hear that the governor may not be hearing from constituents that this is something that they care about. This is our opportunity to change that dynamic. That includes in changing the narrative through op-eds and letters to the editor. We have some guidance around that. If you're interested, we can share. But again, because of the inertia behind these issues, because of the sort of just entrenched nature of this, it's going to be challenging to move this agenda, as you all know. So public support is key, and laying out the rationale for why action is so important, and pushing back on some of the negative opinions and not fully factual information that is always out there. So, quote unquote, putting pen to paper, making your voice heard in letters to the editor and op-eds is really important. So again, like public, vocal, loud, consistent support for climate action is really imperative. A couple of numbers to call just to make sure if you are interested in leaving a message for the governor, you can reach him at 828-3333. You can also leave a message for legislators at the Sergeant at Arms office, 828-2228. And making your way to the State House when it works for you is also important. Events will be happening all session long. There are a myriad of different events organized by really concerned constituencies, from businesses to public health to faith to youth leaders who are standing up and saying no more. And we will be celebrating and supporting them this coming January 10th when they bring their declaration for climate action back to the halls of the State House when the legislature is in session, laying out what they are calling for in terms of climate action in commensurate with what's required. So I'm really excited to see them call upon their legislators and the legislature and the governor on the 10th of January. They have a press event that day at 10:30 a.m. So an important event and more to follow. We can keep you abreast of those. Another thing to put on your radar, a couple things, is just following the important work of the Climate Solutions Caucus. The Climate Solutions Caucus meets every Thursday at noon. It's an increasingly packed room, so you very well may be able to follow their work through a live video stream from afar, but you can also know that they're doing that work, and you can find them there Thursdays at noon. And while you're there, take the time to meet with your legislators in the building, again, letting them know where you stand on this. And if you can't get to the State House, or if you don't live in or around Montpelier, a couple other ways for you to stay updated and engage from afar. Every Friday around noon, VNRC, VCV, and our partners will be hosting our very short climate dispatch. You can watch that via Facebook or YouTube if you choose not to do Facebook. You can sign up on our website to get that immediately into your inbox, or you can just find that on our Facebook page. You should also sign up for the emails from VNRC, VCV, and VPIRG to find out what's happening at key times and ways to make your voice heard. You can follow us on social media, #ActOnClimateVT, and make sure that you share and like our posts and post your own. We're going to do our best to keep you as informed as possible, real time. And again, just underscoring, making this issue, elevating it in the public sphere, articulating all the important reasons why we need to take action, the consequences of doing too little, the opportunity, equity, and economically, and taking really meaningful strategic action. And then lastly, again, just making sure that the governor is hearing from Vermonters about why this is so important. It's particularly important that the governor hears because he has been rhetorically incredibly supportive of climate action, saying, yes, we are still in when it comes to meeting our obligations in the Paris Climate Accord. Unfortunately, in reality, he has done far too little. And as you can see here, he has said things like, I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel. I'm not looking to come out with something dramatic. As you know, as we shared earlier on in this webinar, the time for incremental, insufficient action is long over, and we need really strong, solid steps forward and leaders who are willing to do that. And he needs to hear from his constituents, all of you and far more, that this is a priority. We need him to step up, and there's real opportunity in doing so. So we're asking you to join us in demanding action, ensuring that we make progress on the platform that we put forward, and on other priorities that we look forward to working on with you all this session. I mean, this is a new day. There are Vermonters who have been showing up at every opportunity to call for acting on climate. They're frustrated at the lack of action and demanding action this session, and we are standing in solidarity with them, with you all. And our goal is to make sure that climate in action is the non-starter, and this is our focus is on just making sure we're making progress. So here are the young leaders bringing their pitchforks to the State House. We're not going to be bringing pitchforks. We are going to be bringing strong foundational policies that are going to ensure that we set the stage for getting what we need to do done on climate this year and into the future. So we have a lot of work to do. What we've put forward, we believe, is a really important, strong foot forward. It's going to need a lot of help, your help, in making sure that we can move this agenda and ensure that these policies are shaped in a way that are fair, equitable, just, job creating, and more. So with that, I just want to again beseech you to continue to join us in taking action. And we have gotten lots of questions from you all. I'm just going to answer a few of the logistical ones, and then turn it over, and we'll go back and forth with some questions between Ben and Lauren and I. A couple of people have asked about the polling that Lauren shared. We are happy to share that. We'll follow up with this webinar with an email and a link to the webinar, as well as to the polling.
It's up on, I know, at least VPIRG's website right now. If you go to our homepage, it should be fairly easy to find.
Yeah. And just so you know too, as folks have asked, we will be able to share the webinar after. Some other questions that have come up, a few of you asked about what Massachusetts is doing in terms of their ability to meet their greenhouse gas emission goals that Vermont is not.
So I'll take that one. So this is something that VPIRG has looked into a little bit. There's sort of a wrap on that question and the action that New York and Massachusetts in particular have done, that goes something like, well, they had a lot more coal, so it was a lot easier for them. And so really it's kind of understandable that Vermont has not quite hit the same numbers. The reality of the situation is, if you exclude the electric sector and you just look at heating and transportation and the sort of miscellaneous categories that make up maybe 10%, Vermont is still not doing our part. Our emissions are up in the heating and transportation sectors. New York, Massachusetts, their emissions are down in the heating and transportation sectors. So without going through a laundry list of all the individual programs and actions and investments that other states have made, the short version is they have done more work. They have done more work in the heating and transportation and electric sectors. And I know that that sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but it's basically true. There's certainly some things that we've done and done well, like net metering, like Efficiency Vermont's work. But for the last 10 or so years, with a few notable exceptions, we have significantly rested on our laurels and have not actually taken the additional actions necessary to get our trajectory down the way it is in our neighboring states.
Lauren, I have one for you. Someone had asked what work is happening to bring the governor along.
So I think a lot more work needs to be done to bring the governor along. I think there's a lot of opportunity to be trying to bring this up more. We know, for example, the governor does events all over the state that he calls his cabinets in the different counties, county for a day, cabinet for a day, something like that. So he goes around the state and sets up a bunch of meetings, but no matter where you are in Vermont, these events do happen, and there's the opportunity to check the schedule of the governor. It's posted on VT Digger every week, for example, and just popping on that and seeing if there's anything where is nearby to you. I think we actually need to be showing up to events and bringing up climate change, because we're hearing that this is not coming to the attention of the governor in the way that we need it to be, in a way that he currently feels the pressure to act as ambitiously as we need to be acting. And so I think this is an area where we need to actually ramp up the work and the amount that the governor is hearing about this. Obviously, there's with media work, getting letters to the editor written, tagging on social media, with tagging the governor. There are a variety of ways to try to get this in front of him, but that is an area where I would encourage everyone on this webinar to take some time to think about how you can be making your voice heard beyond calling the governor's office and doing that in a way that is also a little more public.
I just want to speak to that briefly as well. So one thing that was really interesting was, remember the quote that we showed from the governor earlier, not interested in taking any dramatic action. About a week after he said that, he was on, I think it was Vermont Edition, and really tried to backpedal on it and tried to say, no, really what I meant was, I've been supportive of the comprehensive energy plan goals and our state goals, and we don't need to do more than that. And so that kind of said two things to me. One, he did get some blowback from that, and he did react to it. And so I think very clearly, if we keep on pushing him and ramp up that pressure as we're heading into the new year, he will react to that. He will move in the right direction. And then number two, he has said over and over and over again, he is supportive of the Paris Climate Accord. We are still in. He was one of the first governors to sign on to the U.S. Climate Alliance. He said he supports our state's own goals. So we need to call him on that and say, now you need to actually take the actions necessary to hit the goals you support. And yeah, it's certainly possible that at the end of the day, it's going to be empty talk, but it's our job to make sure that he understands that's not acceptable from the perspective of his constituents.
And that's possible with a well-structured Global Warming Solutions Act. And it is our hope. One of you asked if the governor will accept the accountability part of our agenda. That bill, exactly. I think the jury's still out. I think, again, he's been rhetorically very strong. The goal of that bill is to hold ourselves accountable to our essential goals and set the state up for success in terms of creating a process and a planning framework and a framework and setting timelines to actually ensure that we're making, stepped but meaningful progress. So that's our goal. A couple of other questions. Somebody had asked about GMP's support for the 100% RES, the Renewable Electricity Standard. They have proactively come out in support of 100% by 2030. So you'll hear more about that, but I believe that they're strongly supportive of that goal. Another question was where the coalition stands on Senator Polina's recently proposed Green New Deal. I would say that it hasn't been on our radar. It came up briefly in a very packed room of well over 30 diverse coalition members the other day when we were talking about solidifying our agenda. I think there is interest in it, and the premise behind it, I think many people are very excited about, but it's so new and probably would require a lot more work than may be possible this year, but I think there's enthusiasm for the concept. In the meantime, we are continuing to push forward on the 4 very strong priorities that we've identified with the accountability framework as the sort of foundation that will support all kinds of creative and essential initiatives. A couple of other questions. Does the Renewable Energy Standard come with a built-in incentive for residential and commercial development? Turn that over. Ben, you want to take a crack?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're trying to do with each of these bills is really set a framework and a direction for the state. And so on the 100% renewable bill, our goal is for that to be clear and legally binding, that we would be getting to 100% renewable electricity with a significant increase in the required renewables here in Vermont. One kind of way I've been thinking about this is we are trying to pass laws that embody principles, not necessarily sort of program design, so to speak. So our expectation is not that we would be getting into the nitty-gritty of net metering or the other individual renewable energy programs, but that would be follow-on work that would need to be done perhaps in the legislature, perhaps with regulators, to make sure that this really is resulting in more rooftop solar on people's homes, more community scale solar that really is available to low-income Vermonters, to renters, to other people who have historically had a harder time accessing that. So that is all work that we're committed to doing. It may or may not wind up in this particular piece of legislation. And it also very clearly, this legislation very clearly needs to be about wind, about solar, about all of our renewable resources. So again, all of these are things that VPIRG is committed to, all of our organizations are committed to, and we are working in this legislative session to advance the ball as far as we possibly can, to push the envelope as hard as we possibly can, and then continue to work to make all of those things happen in 2021 and beyond.
This is Lauren. We've been getting a few questions about upcoming events. Two that are coming up just this week. On Thursday, Extinction Rebellion and 350 Vermont and AFL-CIO, and if anyone else is co-sponsoring it that I'm forgetting, my apologies. But they are hosting on January 9th something they're calling Pandemonium. They're literally going to bring pots and pans and make a racket for the climate. Again, January 10th, the Youth Lobby is hosting an event at the State House where they're bringing their climate declaration. They're doing a press conference at 10:30 on Friday of this week in the Cedar Creek Room, and then meeting with some lawmakers and committees. So there's a whole spectrum of organizations taking out all kinds of tactics as the urgency around climate action continues to grow. So wherever different people want to plug into different kinds of events, there's opportunity. So, do some scoping, reach out to us. We can connect you to the kinds of actions and groups that are out there. So just know that there's, all kinds of events, and we know there's going to be a kind of consistent drumbeat of action happening at the State House. So again, if you stay tuned via our email list, social media, and so on, we can keep you updated as more and more events continue to roll out, highlighting a range of different perspectives of why people are demanding bold climate action this year.
Okay, this is Joey. We've gotten several questions related to TCI, a couple of different responses. Someone asked about the status of TCI. Again, this was a 12 state and Washington DC based effort. Currently, New Hampshire has already pulled out and has said no matter what, they're not in. But we are in the midst of a public input, a stakeholder input process in terms of the draft MOU that they rolled out in the end of December. It's unclear where other states will land. It is our hope that the governor does sign Vermont on to participate in the program. And someone asked, can the legislature force him to join? Yes. There are indications that they're interested in doing so if he does not support, the program in and of his own accord. And I think you probably have seen there's been, unfortunately, some very sort of negative PR around this, because as often the case, the cost and the consequence and sort of leading with that frame dominates, as opposed to the opportunity and with the economic opportunity and the environmental opportunity. And looking back at success stories like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which our Republican Governor Jim Douglas entered us into in the mid-2000s, which did a lot of good in terms of reducing carbon pollution in the electric sector. So again, it's still to be determined if other states will sign on, if Vermont will sign on. We certainly hope so, as a really important foundation. And another person asked, I think there's been a lot of concern about TCI, both in terms of like pushback from the fossil fuel sector, who doesn't really want to see much of anything happened, and in terms of it being too weak. So people are asking if there are elements of TCI that require pushback. I mean, it is a very modest cap, which is intended, I think, to start the program and start small and build it in and ramp up over time in terms of ratcheting down on the cap and really reducing emissions. But we have some talking points on our website because I think it's really important to ensure that the full frame of this conversation is out there and that we are publicly pushing back because of the important opportunity that this program, while convoluted, could do to reduce emissions in our most intensive, carbon-intensive sector. So important foot forward. We hope it moves forward. It will require your help. So you can find some talking points on our website. You'll find some feedback that we offered as a coalition of groups on the draft MOU, and we're going to continue to dig in to make sure that it is strong and that any revenues raised go to support those who need help the most, which is low income earners, vulnerable Vermonters, and folks who live in more rural reaches. A couple of other questions, which is, what? Hang on.
While Joey's getting the next question, I'll just say one thing that I think is important to remember is that this set of 4 pieces of legislation really is a platform or a package. And, I've been really trying, as much as each of them is going to be in different parts of the State House at different times, different committees and such, really this is a cohesive whole that, if passed as a cohesive whole, is going to effectively set the strategic framework and advance the ball in a significant way in our both in our heating, transportation, and electric sectors. So while something like the Transportation and Climate Initiative that's come out with regionally, I agree, could be stronger and ideally will be stronger, we have an opportunity here in Vermont to pass 4 strong pieces of legislation that add up to more than the sum of the individual parts.
I wanted to note there's a lot of people asking about the various events this week, and I wanted to note that I had listed 350 Vermont as a sponsor of the Pandemonium event. Was provided a little clarity that there's going to be an event outside the State House on January 9th that's an alternative State of the State Pandemonium. There are some other groups or a subset of groups that are looking at some more potentially inside the building direct action that day. So just wanted to clarify that for everybody. So again, different groups are doing different actions with different strategies and tactics. And you can Google and search and connect with various groups of what's happening. The VCV, VNRC, and VPIRG will be at the January 10th Youth Lobby event for sure. And again, a lot of upcoming events beyond that in the coming weeks.
And I'm just wanting to be really cognizant of everyone's time, knowing that we are at time. And just to say a couple of things, people are asking really good questions. Again, with the Green New Deal, we're going to stay tuned to that and get involved. It's a fairly new policy idea that's put forward that could be very promising. Our focus is on moving these 4 priorities as a foundational starting point, as a package. That's another interesting and really important policy to explore. We're going to look forward to doing that and to staying connected with you all, including on, again, one of the other issues that you had a lot of questions on was TCI. We are in the midst of that public input process, so we are likely to put together another webinar specifically on TCI only, as we anticipate that there will be a bill introduced in the Senate on TCI, and we'll want to share with you what's encompassed in that bill, what the landscape looks like for Vermont and for the other states, how any proceeds from a potential program could be used, that sort of thing. So look forward to something like that coming down the road. And in the meantime, just wanted to say thanks to Ben and Lauren. Thank you most of all to you all who are joining us, spending time with us this evening, for caring about this issue, and more so for doing everything that you can to help us and help the planet do our part to tackle a an incredibly existential threat. And so we have an obligation, and we also have a huge opportunity here in this lovely Green Mountain state of ours. So thank you again for joining us. Thanks to this team. We're going to follow up with more information and really just see this as a critical focus for the 2020 legislative session, and we're going to need all hands on deck. So enjoy your Monday night. Enjoy this week. We hope to see you at some of these upcoming climate events, and have a great night.